Welcome to Daily Verse Devotion. Some angels fell because of pride. Some rose against God with fire, with swords, with open rebellion. But there was one who simply bowed his head and looked down, and then he could not lift his eyes from the beauty of a woman. Before Lucifer ever said, "I will ascend into heaven," another angel had already descended. He did not declare war, he made a vow, and with one sentence, he dragged 199 of his brothers down into the abyss. His name was Samyaza. He did not shout, he did not rage, but he poisoned heaven with compromise. And from his vow came beings that belonged neither to heaven nor to mankind. If Lucifer was the rebel in open light, then Samyaza was the shadow, moving silently in the hearts of those once trusted. And that is what made him even more dangerous. You think you know the story of the fall? Wait until you learn what happened on Mount Hermon, where the light was withdrawn and blood began to flow. The angelic record of Samyaza, the beginning of the darkness. Leitat starts here. Part 1. Who is Samyaza? He did not come in fire. He did not declare war with thunder. He only looked. And then he looked longer than heaven allowed. His name was Samyaza, an angel who watched, one of the watchers, assigned to observe from a distance, quietly recording everything that happened on the earth. They were not allowed to interfere, not allowed to descend, only to watch. But then his gaze became a crack. In heaven's order, Samyaza once stood at the edge of the skies, where light could not reach the ground, watching humanity like a silent guardian. But one day, he lingered too long. He no longer looked to understand. He looked to desire. He saw the daughters of men, not once, but over and over again. The beauty of their bodies, the movement of their hair, the softness of their presence. He could not turn away. What he felt was not love, and not the holy compassion of the other angels. It was confusion, burning with desire, anger, and conflict. For the first time, an angel felt incomplete. Heaven was filled with light, but the earth had something that stirred his heart, not because those women were more special, but because his own heart had started to crack. Holiness no longer felt enough. Obedience felt like suffocation. And Samyaza longed to touch what heaven had forbidden. It was not yet sin, but it was the moment. Heaven's reason began to tremble. He no longer thought like an angel. He thought like a creature who wanted. He thought like a man. And in that thought, he fell. The Book of Enoch records, when the angels saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, Samyaza was the first to waver. He did not act recklessly, but that was the danger. He calculated. He knew that if he stepped forward first, he would carry the guilt alone. So he spoke a sentence that the universe had never heard. From the mouth of an angel, "I fear that you will not go through with this, and I alone will have to pay the price." He did not persuade with power. He did not force with weapons. He led with compromise, and because of him, 200 angels joined together in a forbidden oath on Mount Hermon, the mountain that became the symbol of eternal rebellion. Samyaza was not like Lucifer. He did not crave a throne. He did not try to take over heaven. He only wanted what heaven had not granted, and he would have it at any cost. In that silence, he trapped heaven itself in a deliberate, organized fall. His sin was not sudden. It was slow, planned, nurtured, wrapped in the false holiness of an angel still called the Watcher. And he was the one who opened the first door for darkness to enter. Part 2. The Covenant on Mount Hermon, the oath that could not be revoked. Some wars begin with swords and fire, but the first rebellion against heaven began with a vow. Samyaza knew what he was thinking was dangerous. He also knew that if he acted alone, he would be punished alone. So he did something worse than rebellion. He turned personal sin into a collective pact. He was not in a rush. He quietly observed the other angels, those who had also begun to look down and whose hearts were starting to tremble. And then he realized he was not the only one cracking. He was just the first one. Brave enough to speak, on top of Mount Hermon, under a moonless sky, 200 angels stood around him. This was no meeting. It was a ritual, a dark ceremony that had never existed in heaven's history. There was no lightning, no wind, only sacred silence about to be broken. And Samyaza said, "I fear that you will not go through with this, and if that happens, I alone will have to bear the punishment." But before he said those words, he wrestled deeply in his heart, not between right and wrong, but between loneliness and alliance. He knew he no longer belonged to the light, but if others would fall with him, he would not feel guilty. He didn't need to be forgiven. He just didn't want to fall alone. That is the root of darkness, not rebellion, but the craving to be accepted in sin. His words were short, cold, but they pierced the eternal weakness of every wavering soul, the fear of being isolated in the light. Many angels had already been looking down, but none dared to be the first to step down. They needed someone to take the blame first, so they could feel safe inside the darkness of the group, and Samyaza gave them that excuse. They made a covenant. One by one, each lifted a hand toward the sky, and that oath tore the veil between heaven and earth. From that moment, none were innocent. None could turn back. The oath became chains, not to bind Satan, but to bind the very angels who chose darkness themselves. Mount Hermon, in ancient Hebrew, comes from Herem, meaning accursed. And from that night on, Jewish tradition gave it another name, the Mountain of the Cursed Oath. Sin does not begin with action. It begins with collective compromise, disguised as courage. And Samyaza was not just a sinner. He was the founder of a fallen system. He did not fall head first. He stood tall. He made an oath and pulled an entire army down with him. Part 3. The consequences of that decision. The oath was made. The boundary between angel and human was erased. And the consequence was not just violation. The consequence was a new generation, never meant to exist in creation. Samyaza and the Watcher angels descended. They did not force. They married. But in that seemingly lawful act, they committed a genetic rebellion. They gave the women of the earth a seed that did not belong to the ground, and from it came a new race, not human, not divine. They were the Nephilim. The Book of Enoch describes them as giants, tall, powerful. But what made them terrifying was not their size. It was their nature. The Nephilim did not have souls like humans. They knew no limits, no compassion, no hunger that could be satisfied. They consumed and kept consuming until there was nothing left to eat, except mankind itself. They could not be controlled by Samyaza. They did not obey the angels who birthed them. They were born from illegal fusion, the chemical reaction of lust and power. The Nephilim became the first kings. They built fortresses, founded empires, taught warfare, and led the world into an age of endless bloodshed. And everyone believed it was progress, but in truth, it was the first model of destruction. The fall was no longer a spiritual decision. It had become a bloodline. And when sin runs through the bloodstream, it is not just wrong, it reproduces. The trees were cut down. The animals killed for pleasure. Humans became food. Children were sacrificed. And blood. Blood covered the land. The Book of Enoch says, "The earth cried out, and the voice of innocent souls reached heaven." And that was when the sky began to react. Samyaza, who once dreamed of creating a new world through desire, could no longer control what he had helped unleash. Sin always grows beyond the one who creates it, and those who plant illegal seeds are always the first to be devoured by the very generation they brought into being. The Nephilim were not just creatures. They were living symbols of a system that had turned against the design of creation. They were the flesh and blood evidence of a terrifying question. What happens when the limits of God are broken and mankind applauds? Part 4. The Eternal Judgment. Samyaza's sin was not overlooked, not reduced, not given any condition for redemption. He did not die, but he was sentenced with a punishment that would last until the final day of judgment. The Book of Enoch records an image found nowhere else in all of Scripture. Samyaza was hung upside down between heaven and earth, imprisoned in the deepest place, between two worlds. It was not just physical punishment. It was the ultimate symbol of shame. He was no longer an angel, and no longer a being among humans. He was suspended between sky and soil, belonging to neither. God did not send just one angel. He sent the four mightiest messengers of heaven: Michael, the warrior of justice; Gabriel, the herald of truth; Raphael, the healer of wounds; Uriel, the keeper of divine mysteries. They did not come to warn. They came to execute judgment. All the fallen angels were chained in the abyss, but only Samyaza, the one who initiated the oath, the one who began the rebellion, was hung upside down between two realms. No one interceded for him. No one redeemed him. Not a single plea was accepted. He was once the leader of the Watchers. Now he became the symbol of sacred isolation, unwelcome in heaven, unrecognized on earth, and forbidden from death. He is the one who lives, but belongs to no world. When his offspring, the Nephilim, were destroyed, their spirits were allowed to roam, but Samyaza was not. He was locked in. No exit, no movement, no rising, no falling. The universe continues to move, but he remains suspended in divine stillness. In the entire history of fallen angels, no one has received a punishment like Samyaza, because he was not just a sinner. He was the starting point. He lit the spark that opened the door of compromise. He became the living proof of this eternal truth. The one who knows what is right, but still chooses wrong, for the sake of compromise, will be hung where no one can reach to save. Part 5. Why was Samyaza punished more severely? When people speak of rebellion, they usually think of Lucifer, the proud angel who wanted to rise above the Most High. But in the Book of Enoch, Lucifer is not the most dangerous one. The one punished the most, the one never redeemed, never allowed a final word, never given a second chance, was Samyaza. The reason was not because he was stronger, not because he deceived more angels. It was because Samyaza did not rebel out of pride, but out of desire. Lucifer rebelled to become God. Samyaza rebelled to become man, all for a single glance, a single moment of lust, and that made him far more dangerous. Lucifer challenged heaven openly, but Samyaza opened a hidden path between heaven and earth. He didn't break the wall. He opened a gate. He didn't declare war. He made a covenant. He didn't shatter laws. He turned them into exceptions. Samyaza's sin was compromise. He brought the sacred down to earth in a legal disguise. He hesitated. He knew it was wrong. And still he said, "If I do this, you must follow. If not, I will bear the punishment alone." It sounded like courage, but in truth, it was the door through which 199 angels fell. Samyaza didn't just commit personal sin. He corrupted the whole system. He turned heavenly hesitation into a hellish pact. That is why God did not forgive him. He knew what was right. He was not deceived. He chose wrong. Because compromise felt easier, and heaven always judges most severely those who know the truth, but still choose wrong. Among all the watchers, none were hung between earth and sky, only Samyaza, because he was the leader, the gate opener, the first to vow, the one who tempted, and the one who promised to carry the guilt, but could not keep his word. Samyaza became the final image of a fall that did not come from pride, but from compromise with desire. And what made him most dangerous was that he wore the face of responsibility while leading an entire system into the shadows. Part 6. After he was hung, the dark legacy he left behind. Samyaza was chained, hung upside down, between heaven and earth. But the terrifying truth is, he still left behind a legacy, not a sword, not a relic, but a system, an ideology, an invisible network that has crept through human history for thousands of years. Even in chains, Samyaza was never truly silent. He didn't need to speak because his breath still moves through the world, through his children, the Nephilim, half divine, half human beings. Born from the union of Samyaza and the daughters of men, inherited not only his strength but also his ambition, his thirst to dominate. They didn't build societies. They devoured civilizations. They didn't give laws. They distorted them. They distorted them. They didn't lead. They dragged humanity. They dragged humanity into a nightmare of demon worship, wrapped in the robes of sacred ritual after God destroyed their physical bodies. In the Great Flood, the souls of the Nephilim did not rise to heaven. They did not descend to the grave. They wandered as living remnants of a dead will. But it wasn't just the Nephilim who carried Samyaza's legacy. Humanity was infected too. We embraced what he began, the charm of false holiness, the compromise with what is wrong, the domination through twisted knowledge, the silence before darkness. In exchange for power, Samyaza became the father of a rebellious bloodline, not just in the flesh, but in the mind. He doesn't need to rise again because his ideology is still being republished every day through systems of control, manipulation, and fear. He was hung between sky and soil, but his legacy flooded the earth, reached toward the heavens, and soaked into the human soul. We live in an age where evil doesn't scream. It whispers, doesn't knock. It negotiates, doesn't force. It persuades. That is the legacy of Samyaza. Not war, but consent. To darkness, he was imprisoned, but his will was never erased. And as long as mankind continues to call darkness light, just to feel safe, Samyaza is still winning. Part 7. Final warning. When your soul stands before his darkness, he was imprisoned, he was hung. His name was erased from the official texts. But Samyaza has not vanished, not because his body lives, but because the gate he opened has never been closed. When you stand before a wrong choice, and your conscience still knows what is right, you are standing where Samyaza once stood. When you say, I know this is wrong, but if everyone does it, I can't be the only one left standing. You are repeating the oath of Hermon in modern form, comfort instead of conviction. Samyaza didn't begin with demon worship. He began with a look, a gaze that lingered and didn't turn away, a thought that wasn't silenced, a hesitation that wasn't rejected, and at last, a compromise was spoken, wrapped in the illusion of responsibility. I will bear the guilt, as long as you do it with me. Evil doesn't always come with fire. It often comes with a nod, a silence, a quiet agreement to belong. That is the most dangerous legacy of Samyaza. Not the Nephilim, not the darkness, but the breath of compromise. That still moves within the human soul. His rebellion was judged most severely because he knew heaven. He had seen the light. He had served in glory and still let go for one moment of desire, for one oath with darkness, for a system of rebellion he thought he could control. You might say, I'm not Samyaza, but every time you hesitate before the truth, every time you accept the wrong just to avoid isolation, every time you choose silence over witnessing to the light, you move closer to where he fell. Samyaza did not fall in darkness. He fell in the light when he looked into the dark and called it worth it. The Bible never names him, but the Bible warns us about the very path he walked, the path of one who knows and still does not do, the one who places desire above obedience. You will never be hung between heaven and earth, but your soul, if left in rebellion, can drift endlessly, belonging to neither world. So when you stand at a crossroads, remember Samyaza, not to be afraid, but to be awake. Don't just see his fall, see where it began. A single look, a thought left unguarded, a loyalty traded for agreement, and a soul forever suspended between two worlds. You've just walked through the darkness of a fallen angel who swore an oath against heaven itself. But this story doesn't end here, because Samyaza was only the beginning. What about those who followed him? The other watchers, the Nephilim, and the dark systems the world still celebrates as progress? Every layer will be revealed, every soul, every judgment, every hidden truth. Subscribe to Daily Verse Devotion now and turn on notifications, because in the next episodes, we'll uncover what was never meant to be forgotten, the secrets of Azael, the rise of the Watchers, the bloodline of the Nephilim, and the apocalyptic justice that still waits in the shadows.